Commander Krell stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Wind, watching the darkness of space through the massive viewing screen. His forearms crossed behind his back in the traditional Vorthon stance of command. The stars looked the same as they always did before battle. Cold, distant, and uncaring about who lived or died in the void between them. 30 years of military service had taught Krell many things. The most important lesson was that every species fought the same way. They might use different weapons or different ships, but war itself never changed. There were patterns, rules, ways that intelligent beings behaved when their lives were on the line. The Zelkari always formed their ships into tight squares like ancient warriors with shields. They moved slowly but hit hard when they reached you. The Nethys were different. They came fast and struck quick, then ran away before you could hit back. The Quantum Collective used their advanced technology to stay far away and shoot from a distance. Each species had their way of fighting, and once you learned it, you could beat them. Krell had beaten them all. His ship hummed with activity around him. Officers moved between control stations, checking weapons and shields. The familiar sounds of a warship preparing for battle filled the air. It was a sound Krell had heard hundreds of times before. Today would be no different from any other day. "Commander," said Lieutenant Yoon from the sensor station, "the human fleet is approaching. I am reading some unusual energy patterns from their ships." Krell turned one of his large yellow eyes toward his tactical officer. Yoon was young but smart. He had served under Krell for 2 years and learned much about reading enemy movements. If Yoon said something was unusual, it was worth listening to. "What kind of unusual patterns?" Krell asked. "Their power signatures are not consistent, sir. Some ships show very high energy output, others much lower. Their formation also seems random. I cannot identify any standard tactical arrangement." Krell walked to the sensor display and looked at the data himself. The approaching human fleet showed up as dozens of dots on the screen. Yoon was right. The ships did not seem to be following any pattern that Krell recognized. Some were large, others small. They moved at different speeds and in different directions, like a group of fish swimming without a leader. "They are new to space warfare," Krell said after studying the display. "Only 100 years since first contact with galactic civilization. They probably do not understand proper military formations yet." This was going to be easier than Krell had expected. The Vorthon Empire had sent him to deal with these humans because they were causing problems in 3 different star systems. Human traders were competing with Vorthon businesses. Human colonies were growing too fast and taking resources that the Empire wanted. The High Command decided it was time to show these newcomers their place in the galaxy. Krell had read the intelligence reports about human military capability. Their technology was decent but not advanced. Their ships were smaller than Vorthon vessels. Their weapons were less powerful. Most importantly, they had no real experience fighting in space. All their wars had been on the surface of their home planet against each other. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human fleet," reported Communications Officer Thane. "Put it on the main screen," Krell ordered. The viewing screen changed from showing stars to showing the face of a human. The creature had only 2 eyes, both facing forward, and no visible natural armor. Its skin was soft-looking and pale. This was Admiral Lee Dae-ho, according to the intelligence files. The human leader of this small fleet. Commander Krell of the Vorthon Empire. Admiral Lee said in accented but clear galactic standard language. "I am Admiral Lee Dae-ho of the United Earthspace Navy. We are here to protect the colony ships heading to New Busan. We do not want to fight you, but we will if we must." Krell studied the human's face. Admiral Lee looked calm, but there was something in his eyes that Krell had not expected. Most species showed fear or anger before battle. This human showed neither. His expression was steady, like someone who had made a difficult decision and was at peace with it. "Admiral Lee," Krell replied, "you are in Vorthon space without permission. Your colony ships are taking resources that belong to the Empire. Withdraw now, and there will be no bloodshed." "This system was claimed by Earth 2 years ago," Lee answered. "Our people need a new home. We will not abandon them." The transmission ended. Krell studied the tactical display again. The human fleet was still approaching, but their movement patterns made no sense. Some ships had moved ahead of the others. Some had fallen behind. A few seemed to be moving in completely wrong directions. "Lieutenant Yoon, analysis of enemy formation?" Yoon worked at his station for several minutes before responding. "Sir, I cannot determine their battle plan. Their ships appear to be positioned randomly. Perhaps their admiral does not know how to command a fleet properly. That was probably it. These humans had spent so long fighting on planetary surfaces that they did not understand three-dimensional space combat. Admiral Lee might be brave, but bravery meant nothing without proper tactics and training. Krell ordered his fleet into Battle Formation 7. It was a classic arrangement that had served him well in dozens of campaigns. His heavy cruisers moved to the center, forming the strong core of his attack. The destroyers spread out on both sides, ready to wrap around the enemy like closing fingers. His fighters launched and took positions to provide cover and strike fast targets. It was beautiful in its simplicity. The heavy cruisers would engage the enemy's main force while the destroyers attacked from the sides. Any enemy ships that tried to escape would run into his fighters. The formation had never failed him. "All ships report ready for battle," announced Lieutenant Yoon. "Very good. Signal the fleet. We advance in Battle Formation 7. Target their largest ships first. These humans need to learn what happens when they challenge the Vorthon Empire." As his fleet moved forward, Krell felt the familiar calm that came before victory. He had done this so many times that it was almost boring. The humans would try to fight, realize they were outmatched and either surrender or die. Then he could return to Vorthon Prime and report another successful mission. The human fleet was getting closer now. Krell could see individual ships on his display. They still showed no sign of organizing into a proper battle formation. Some had actually moved behind their own allies, which made no tactical sense at all. It was like watching children play at war. "Sir," said Yoon, "the humans are now within weapons range. Begin the attack," Krell ordered. The battle was about to begin, and Krell was completely certain he knew how it would end. The first shots of the battle lit up the darkness of space like deadly fireworks. Krell's heavy cruisers opened fire with their main weapons, sending bright beams of energy toward the human fleet. The attack was perfectly coordinated, just as Krell had planned. Every shot was aimed at the largest human ships, following standard doctrine to eliminate the enemy's most dangerous vessels first. The humans responded in a way that made no sense at all. Instead of returning fire or trying to dodge, one human ship suddenly broke away from their main group. It was a medium-sized cruiser, painted with strange markings that Krell did not recognize. The ship accelerated directly toward his fleet, ignoring the weapons fire that was hitting its shields. "Sir," Lieutenant Yoon said, his voice confused. "One of their ships is charging our center line alone." Krell watched the tactical display with growing puzzlement. The human ship was moving at maximum speed toward his heavy cruisers. It was not firing its weapons. It was not calling for support from other human ships. It was just rushing forward like an animal with no brain. "Is their captain trying to surrender?" asked Weapons Officer Kane. "No surrender signal." "Sir," replied Communications Officer Thane. "The ship is still accelerating toward us." Krell had seen desperate attacks before, but this was beyond desperate. It was suicide. One ship against his entire center formation could accomplish nothing except its own destruction. Maybe the human captain had gone crazy from fear. "Focus all fire on that ship," Krell ordered. "Destroy it quickly." Every weapon that could target the charging human vessel opened fire. Energy beams and plasma bolts struck its shields like hammers hitting glass. The human ship shook under the impact but kept coming. Its shields failed after 30 seconds of concentrated fire, and weapons began tearing holes in its hull. Any sane captain would have turned away or ejected in an escape pod. This human captain did neither. The ship kept accelerating even as explosions ripped through its structure. Pieces of metal and burning gas trailed behind it like the tail of a comet. On the tactical display, Krell could see that the ship's power levels were dropping fast. "It would be dead in less than a minute, sir. The human ship is on a collision course with our shield generators," Yoon reported. "Evasive action," Krell ordered, but it was too late. The human ship, now more wreckage than vessel, slammed into the Iron Wind's shield projectors. The explosion was massive, sending shockwaves through both ships. Emergency lights flashed red across Krell's bridge as systems overloaded. The artificial gravity flickered for a moment, making everyone grab onto their stations. "Damage report," Krell demanded. "Main shields are down," Yoon said, working frantically at his console. "We lost 2 shield generators and have damage to the power grid. Secondary systems are coming online, but we will need at least 10 minutes to restore full defensive capability." Krell stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The human captain had thrown away his ship and his life for what seemed like no reason. Yes, the Iron Wind's shields were down, but that would not change the outcome of the battle. The human fleet was still outnumbered and outgunned. Then the rest of the human fleet moved. And Krell realized he had made a terrible mistake. The human ships did not attack his heavy cruisers as any rational enemy would do. Instead, they poured through the gap in his formation like water flowing through a crack in a dam. But they did not head for his most powerful ships. They went for targets that no sensible military force would prioritize. Human fighters swarmed toward his supply ships, the vessels that carried food, fuel, and spare parts. Other human ships targeted his medical frigates, the ships that treated wounded soldiers and had no weapons of their own. A group of human destroyers ignored his battle cruisers completely and headed straight for his command and communication ships. "What are they doing?" Krell asked, but he was talking more to himself than to his crew. The human attack was breaking every rule of space combat that Krell had learned in 30 years of war. You attacked the enemy's strongest ships first to reduce their ability to fight back. You protected supply lines, but did not waste time attacking the enemy's support vessels when their warships were still dangerous. You never ignored heavily armed cruisers to chase after medical ships, yet somehow, the human attack was working. Without his supply ships, Krell's fleet would run out of fuel and ammunition within hours. Without his medical frigates, wounded crew members would die instead of being saved and returned to duty. Without his communication ships, he could not coordinate his forces effectively. The humans were not trying to win a glorious battle. They were trying to cripple his ability to fight at all. "Sir, Captain Park Ji-woo of the human vessel that rammed us," Thane reported. "I am receiving his final transmission. He says, tell your commander that was for the colonies on Kepler Prime." Krell did not understand the message, but something cold moved in his chest. The human captain had not been crazy or desperate. He had been angry. He had sacrificed his ship and his life deliberately, with full knowledge of what it would accomplish. The battle continued around them, but now Krell was fighting a kind of war he had never experienced before. Human ships seemed to appear everywhere at once, striking targets he had not thought to protect properly. They moved in small groups that changed direction without warning. They coordinated attacks without using standard military communications that his intelligence officers could decode. "Lieutenant Yoon, what is their battle plan?" Krell asked. Yoon worked at his station for several minutes before looking up with confusion in his large eyes. "Sir, I cannot identify any overall strategy. Each group of human ships seems to be operating independently. They have no central command structure that I can detect. That should have made the humans weaker, not stronger. Military forces needed clear command and coordination to be effective. An army where every unit did whatever it wanted would be chaos, not a fighting force. But somehow, this chaos was defeating his carefully organized fleet, a human cruiser, painted with symbols that looked like Earth's moon attacked his weapons platform Gamma 7. The platform had enough firepower to destroy 3 human ships, but the cruiser did not attack it directly. Instead, it fired at the platform's sensor array, blinding it, then used the confusion to rescue crew members from a damaged human transport. The human captain could have destroyed the weapons platform if he had focused his attack properly. Instead, he chose to save lives rather than eliminate threats. It made no military sense, but it worked because Krell's forces were not prepared for an enemy who valued rescue missions over tactical victories. "Sir, Admiral Lee is sending another transmission," Thane announced. "Put it on screen," Krell ordered. The human admiral appeared again, but now his bridge showed signs of battle damage. Smoke drifted in the background and one of his officers had a bandage on her head. Admiral Lee himself had a cut on his cheek, but his expression was still calm. "Commander Krell," Lee said, "you fight with skill and honor, but you do not understand why we are here. We are not trying to conquer your empire or steal your resources. We are trying to protect our people. That changes everything." The transmission ended, leaving Krell staring at a blank screen. Around him, the battle continued. But he was beginning to realize that he might not understand this war as well as he had thought. For the first time in 30 years of military service, Commander Krell was confused. Krell sat in his private quarters aboard the Iron Wind, staring at reports that made no sense. 3 hours had passed since the battle ended, and he was still trying to understand what had happened. His fleet had withdrawn to regroup, leaving the humans in control of the space around New Busan colony. On paper, it should have been impossible. His forces outnumbered the humans 2-1. His ships were larger and more heavily armed. His crews had decades of combat experience. Yet somehow the humans had forced him to retreat. The tactical computer on his desk showed battle analysis data in neat rows and columns. Every few minutes it displayed the same message. Unable to determine enemy battle plan. Human actions do not match known tactical patterns. Lieutenant Yoon entered the room carrying a datapad. His young face looked troubled, like someone who had seen something that challenged everything he believed about warfare. "Sir, I have completed the analysis of human military history that you requested," Yoon said. Krell looked up from his reports. After the battle, he had ordered his intelligence officers to gather every available piece of information about how humans fought wars. If he was going to face them again, he needed to understand them better. "What did you find?" Yoon activated his datapad and began reading. "Sir, humans have been fighting wars for their entire recorded history. Not against alien species, but against each other. In the past 5,000 years, they have fought over 10,000 separate conflicts." That number seemed impossibly high to Krell. The Vorthan Empire had fought perhaps 50 wars in the same time period, and most of those were against different alien species who threatened their territory. "They fight their own kind that often?" "Yes, sir. But that is not the strangest part." Yoon touched his datapad again, bringing up new information. Human military tactics do not follow logical patterns. They often sacrifice valuable resources for goals that seem to have no strategic importance. They have a concept they call holding the line, where soldiers will fight to the death to defend positions that have no real military value. Krell stood up and walked to the viewing port that looked out into space. In the distance, he could see lights from the human fleet. They were still protecting their colony ships, just as Admiral Lee had promised. "Give me an example of this illogical behavior," Krell said. Yoon consulted his datapad. During their Second World War, human soldiers defended a city called Stalingrad for months. The city had little strategic value, and the cost in lives was enormous. Any rational military force would have withdrawn and regrouped elsewhere. Instead, the humans fought for every building, every street, every room. They turned the entire city into a fortress. Did they win? Yes, sir. The enemy forces attacking the city were completely destroyed, but the cost was over 1 million human lives on both sides. Krell turned back to face his tactical officer. 1 million lives for a single city. The entire Vorthan military had fewer than 10 million soldiers in total. The humans had spent 10% of his empire's entire army to hold one location that had no strategic importance. Why would they do such a thing? I do not understand it either, sir. Human military doctrine seems based on principles that have nothing to do with efficient resource management or logical tactical thinking. A communication chime sounded from Krell's desk. He activated the speaker and heard the voice of Communications Officer Thane. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet. It is not directed at us specifically. They appear to be broadcasting to all ships in the system." "Put it through to my quarters," Krell ordered. The voice that came through the speaker was female and young. According to his intelligence files, this was Captain Song Minho of the human destroyer Retribution. "This is Captain Song to all vessels. We have detected Vorthan mining ships approaching the asteroid field near New Busan. These ships pose a threat to our civilian transports. I am taking my ship to intercept. If anyone wants to follow me, you are welcome. If not, I understand. This might be a one-way trip." The transmission ended. Krell looked at Lieutenant Yoon with confusion. Why would a human captain broadcast her intentions to everyone, including enemy forces who might be listening? It made no tactical sense to warn your opponents about your plans. "Sir, should we alert our mining ships about the human attack?" Yoon asked. "Yes, of course." Krell activated his communication system and sent a warning to the mining fleet. Then he called up the tactical display to watch what would happen. The human destroyer Retribution was moving toward the asteroid field where Vorthan mining ships were collecting rare metals. It was alone, just as Captain Song had said it might be. One destroyer against 6 armed mining vessels and their escort ships should have been suicide. Then something unexpected happened. Other human ships began following the Retribution. Not because they had been ordered to, but because they chose to. First 1, then 3, then 7 human vessels broke away from their defensive positions around the colony ships and headed for the asteroid field. "Sir, I do not understand," Yoon said, watching the display. They are abandoning their defensive formation to follow one captain who volunteered for a dangerous mission. No one ordered them to go. Krell watched the human ships approach his mining fleet. The mining vessels were heavily armed and designed to work in dangerous environments. Their escort ships included 2 cruisers and a battleship. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, just as they had been in the first battle. But somehow, Krell already suspected the outcome would be the same. The battle in the asteroid field was brief but decisive. The human ships used the large rocks for cover, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. They did not try to destroy the Vorthon mining ships. Instead, they disabled their engines and weapon systems, then broadcast surrender terms. Captain Song's voice came over the communication channel again. "Vorthon mining fleet, this is Captain Song. We do not want to hurt you. Shut down your operations and withdraw from this system. Your people will be allowed to leave safely." The mining fleet commander agreed to the surrender terms. He had little choice with his ships disabled and surrounded. But what happened next surprised Krell even more than the battle itself. The humans helped repair the damaged Vorthon ships before allowing them to leave. They provided medical aid to wounded crew members. They even gave the mining fleet enough fuel to reach the nearest Vorthon base safely. "Sir," Yoon said quietly, "they are treating our people better than we treat our own prisoners." Krell had no answer to that observation. In Vorthon military doctrine, prisoners were resources to be used or bargained with. These humans seemed to view them as people who deserved care and respect, even though they were enemies. Later that evening, Krell received another intelligence report about human military history. This one focused on something called the Geneva Convention, a set of rules that humans had created to govern how wars should be fought. The rules required armies to treat prisoners well, protect medical personnel, and avoid targeting civilian populations. The strangest part was that most human nations actually followed these rules, even when it put them at a disadvantage in battle. "Lieutenant Yoon," Krell said as he finished reading the report, "schedule a meeting with my senior officers. We need to completely revise our tactical approach to fighting these humans." "What should I tell them the meeting is about, sir?" Krell looked out at the stars again, thinking about everything he had learned. 30 years of military experience had taught him that warfare was about defeating your enemy as efficiently as possible. The humans seemed to believe that warfare was about something else entirely. "Tell them we are facing an enemy that fights according to rules we do not understand. And until we learn those rules, we are going to keep losing." As Yoon left to arrange the meeting, Krell remained at the viewing port, watching the distant lights of the human fleet. For the first time in his long military career, he was beginning to realize that he might need to learn how to fight all over again. The humans were teaching him that there was more to warfare than just winning and losing. The problem was he did not yet understand what that something more might be. 2 weeks after the battle at New Busan, Krell found himself doing something he had never done before in 30 years of military service. He was sitting across a table from an enemy prisoner, trying to understand how the human mind worked. The prisoner was Sergeant Oh Kyung-soo, a human soldier captured during a failed boarding attempt on one of Krell's supply ships. Standard interrogation techniques had produced nothing useful. The human simply sat quietly and stared at Krell with dark eyes that showed no fear. "Sergeant Oh," Krell said in careful galactic standard, "your mission failed. Your ship was destroyed. Your fellow soldiers are dead. You have no reason to protect military secrets anymore." The human said nothing. He had been saying nothing for 3 days. Krell tried a different approach. "We know your fleet is running low on supplies. We know your colony ships are vulnerable. If you cooperate with us, we can arrange for your people to be relocated safely to another system." Still nothing. The human's expression did not change at all. Lieutenant Yoon entered the interrogation room carrying a data pad. "Sir, we have received new intelligence about human military culture. Perhaps this will help explain the prisoner's behavior." Krell looked at the information on the data pad. What he read there made him understand why his interrogation was failing. According to captured human military manuals, soldiers were taught something called a code of conduct. They were expected to resist interrogation, protect their fellow soldiers, and never give up hope of rescue or escape. But the most important part was something humans called honor. They believed it was better to die than to betray their comrades or their mission. "Sergeant O," Krell said, looking up from the data pad, "you know we could kill you at any time. Why do you not try to save your life by helping us?" For the first time, the human spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. Because my life is not the most important thing. Krell stared at the prisoner. In Vorthon culture, self-preservation was the highest priority. Every individual had a duty to survive and serve the Empire for as long as possible. The idea that something could be more important than your own life was difficult to understand. What is more important than your life? My duty, my friends. The people we are protecting. The human met Krell's eyes without flinching. You can kill me, but you cannot make me betray them. That evening, Krell reviewed combat footage from recent human battles. His intelligence officers had managed to recover data from destroyed human ships, giving him a closer look at how humans actually fought when they thought no one was watching. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about rational military behavior. During the Battle of Kepler Station, Commander Choi Suman's ship had lost life support after taking heavy damage. Standard protocol for any intelligent species would be immediate evacuation. The crew should have abandoned ship and tried to survive in escape pods. Instead, Commander Choi ordered his people to put on emergency suits and keep fighting. They held their position for 6 hours, allowing human reinforcement ships to arrive and save thousands of civilians on the station below. By the time help arrived, half of Choi's crew had died from oxygen poisoning or equipment failure. The tactical computer analysis showed that Choi could have saved his entire crew by withdrawing. The station would have been lost, but his people would have lived to fight another day. Instead, he chose to sacrifice his crew to save strangers. The strangest part was that Choi's crew had agreed with his decision. The combat recordings showed them cheering when the reinforcements arrived, even though many of them were dying. Krell watched the footage 3 times, trying to understand what he was seeing. These humans had chosen to die for people they had never met. It went against every principle of military efficiency and resource management that Krell had ever learned. But somehow, it had worked. The station was saved, the civilians evacuated, and the human reinforcements had gone on to win a major victory against Vorthon forces in that sector. "Sir," Lieutenant Yoon said, entering Krell's quarters with another report. "I have been studying human psychological profiles. I think I am beginning to understand why they behave this way." Krell gestured for his tactical officer to continue. "Humans do not see warfare as a competition between military forces. They see it as a struggle between different ideas about how people should live. When they fight, they are not just trying to defeat an enemy. They are trying to prove that their way of life is worth protecting." "That makes no logical sense," Krell replied. "Ideas cannot be defended with weapons. Territory can be defended. Resources can be defended. But ideas exist only in the mind." "Yes, sir. But humans believe that if they fail to defend their ideas, then even winning the war would be meaningless. They would rather die fighting for what they believe than live under a system they think is wrong." Krell walked to his viewing port and looked out at the human fleet. They were still there, still protecting their colony ships, still willing to fight against superior odds. After 2 weeks of studying human behavior, he was beginning to understand that they would never surrender, no matter how hopeless their situation became. The next day brought news that changed everything. Major Kim Tae-hyun and his small garrison on New Seoul had been surrounded by Vorthon forces. The human commander had been offered generous surrender terms, safe passage for his soldiers, and protection for the civilian population. Kim had refused. His final transmission was broadcast on all communication frequencies, ensuring that every human and Vorthon ship in the system could hear it. Krell listened to the message in his command center, surrounded by his senior officers. "This is Major Kim Tae-hyun of the New Seoul Defense Force," the human said. His voice was calm despite the explosions that could be heard in the background. "We have fought well, but we cannot hold this position much longer. To any humans listening, remember that we stood here by choice. We fought here by choice. We die here by choice." More explosions. The sound of weapons fire grew louder. "You may take this world, but you will never break our spirit. Humanity remembers. Humanity endures. Humanity fights. Tell our families that we kept faith with our duty. Tell our children that freedom is worth any price." The transmission ended in static. Krell stood in silence for several minutes. Around him, his officers waited for orders. Finally, he spoke. "Send a message to Major Kim's forces. Offer them one final chance to surrender." "Sir," said Communications Officer Thane. "The battle ended 20 minutes ago. Our ground forces report no survivors." Krell closed his eyes. Kim and his soldiers had fought to the death rather than accept defeat. They had gained nothing by their sacrifice except the knowledge that they had remained true to their principles. In Vortan military thinking, it was a waste of valuable resources. But somehow Krell suspected that other humans would see it differently. They would remember Major Kim not as a failure but as a hero. "Sir," Lieutenant Yoon said quietly, "what are your orders for the prisoner?" Krell thought about Sergeant O sitting in his cell, still refusing to cooperate despite everything that had happened. The human would never break no matter what Krell did to him. His duty meant more to him than his life. "Release him," Krell said. "Sir, send him back to his people. Tell them that Commander Krell honors courage, even in an enemy." As his officers left to carry out his orders, Krell remained alone in his command center. For the first time in his long military career, he was beginning to understand that there were things more important than winning and losing. The humans were teaching him about honor. The problem was he was not sure he liked what he was learning. 3 months into the war, Krell had learned more about combat than in all his previous campaigns combined. The humans had forced him to throw away his tactical manuals and think in ways that went against everything he had been taught about military strategy. When human ships started using civilian cargo vessels as improvised warships, Krell had to change his targeting protocols. His computers were programmed to ignore non-military ships, but the humans had turned freighters into missile platforms and passenger liners into troop transports. Every vessel in space had become a potential threat. When the humans began broadcasting classical music during space battles, Krell realized they were using psychological warfare in ways he had never imagined. The music was not random. During fierce combat, they played slow, sad songs that made even Vortan soldiers think about home and family. During quick strikes, they played fast, energetic music that seemed to make their own forces fight harder. The strangest human tactic was something they called mercy operations. In the middle of active combat zones, human medical ships would approach disabled Vortan vessels and offer aid to wounded crew members. They did this even when it put their own people at risk. The first time it happened, Krell thought it was a trick. No military force would waste resources helping enemy soldiers during battle, but the humans kept doing it mission after mission, until Krell realized they were serious about helping anyone who needed medical care, regardless of which side they fought for. "Sir," Lieutenant Yoon said during one of their daily briefings, "I have a report from Captain Havel of the cruiser Darkstar. Yesterday his ship was damaged during the engagement near Titan 7. A human medical vessel approached and offered assistance." "What did Captain Havel do?" "He accepted the help, sir. The human doctor saved 12 of his crew members who would have died otherwise. Then they left without asking for anything in return." Krell set down his datapad and looked at his tactical officer. "Did the humans try to gather intelligence while they were aboard our ship?" "No, sir. They only provided medical care. Captain Havel said their doctors worked alongside our medical staff and shared their knowledge freely. They even left behind advanced medical supplies. This kind of behavior made no sense from a military perspective. The humans were helping their enemies become stronger and more capable of fighting. Yet they continued to do it, battle after battle, as if healing wounded soldiers was more important than winning wars. The turning point came during what would later be called the prisoner exchange incident. Colonel An So-young of the human forces had requested a meeting with Krell to discuss captured personnel. She arrived at the neutral space station where they had agreed to meet, carrying only a datapad and wearing no weapons. Krell met her in Conference Room 7, accompanied by Lieutenant Yoon and 2 security guards. Colonel An was a small woman with graying hair and tired eyes. She looked like someone who had seen too much combat and wanted it to end. "Commander Krell," she said, bowing slightly in what Krell recognized as a human gesture of respect. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Colonel An," Krell replied, "what do you wish to discuss?" She activated her datapad and placed it on the table between them. The screen showed a list of names and identification numbers. "These are the Vorthan soldiers currently held prisoner by human forces," she said. 47 officers and crew members from various engagements over the past 2 months. I want to arrange for their return." Krell studied the list. Many of the names were familiar. Good soldiers who had been captured during battles that had not gone as planned. In Vorthan military doctrine, prisoners were valuable assets that could be traded for strategic advantages or used to gather intelligence about enemy operations. What do you want in exchange? Krell asked. Colonel An looked confused. Exchange? What are your terms for returning our people? There are no terms, she said. We want to return your soldiers because it is the right thing to do. War is between armies, not between individual people who are just following orders. Krell stared at her for several seconds. You are offering to return 47 trained military personnel and asking for nothing in return? That is correct. Why? Colonel An was quiet for a moment, as if she was trying to find words to explain something that should have been obvious. Commander, these are people. They have families waiting for them. They have lives to return to when this war ends. Keeping them prisoner serves no purpose except to cause suffering. They are enemy soldiers, Krell pointed out. They will return to their units and fight against your forces again. Yes, probably. But that does not change the fact that they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. If we become cruel to our enemies, we lose something important about ourselves. Krell felt something strange happening in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize the feeling as confusion mixed with something that might have been admiration. This human was willing to strengthen her enemy's forces because she believed it was morally correct. There is one condition, Colonel An continued. We would like you to return our prisoners as well. 17 humans currently held by Vorthan forces. That seems reasonable, Krell replied. And we want assurance that all prisoners on both sides will be treated according to the standards set by the Galactic Convention on Prisoner Rights. Krell was not familiar with that convention, but he agreed to research it. Later, he discovered that it was a set of rules created by various species to ensure that prisoners of war were treated humanely. The humans had been following these rules throughout the conflict, even though the Vorthan Empire had never officially agreed to them. The prisoner exchange took place 3 days later at the same neutral station. Krell watched as human and Vorthan soldiers were transferred between ships. The humans looked tired but healthy. Several Vorthan prisoners actually thanked their human captors before leaving. Captain Wang Sung-ho, one of the returned human prisoners, approached Krell before boarding his transport ship. Commander, Wang said in accented but clear galactic standard. I wanted to thank you for agreeing to this exchange. You should thank Colonel An, Krell replied. It was her proposal. Yes, sir. But you could have refused. You could have demanded strategic concessions or military intelligence. Instead, you chose to do what was right for the people involved. Krell found himself studying the human captain's face. Wang had been held prisoner for 6 weeks, but he showed no anger or hatred toward his captors. If anything, he seemed grateful for the opportunity to return to his duties. Captain Wang, Krell said. May I ask you a question? Of course, sir. Why do humans fight wars this way? Why do you help your enemies and release prisoners without gaining strategic advantage? Wang was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. Commander, we fight because we have to. We fight because someone threatens the things we value, but we try to fight in a way that preserves what makes us human. If we abandon our principles to win a war, then even victory becomes a kind of defeat. As the human captain walked away to board his transport, Krell realized that he was beginning to understand something important about the species he was fighting. They were not just trying to win military engagements. They were trying to prove that it was possible to remain honorable even in the middle of a war. That evening, Krell sent a message to Admiral Lee requesting a private communication. When the human admiral appeared on his screen, Krell said something he had never said to an enemy before. Admiral Lee, I want you to know that your people fight with honor. When this war ends, I hope we can meet as soldiers who respect one another. Admiral Lee smiled, and for the first time, Krell saw genuine warmth in the human's eyes. Commander Krell, I believe we already have. Later that night, Krell stood at his viewing port looking out at the stars. The human fleet was still there, still protecting their colony ships, still fighting a war they could not win through conventional military thinking. But Krell was beginning to suspect that the humans had already won something more important than any military victory. They had proven that it was possible to fight with courage, honor, and compassion, even against overwhelming odds. The problem was, Krell was no longer sure which side of this war he wanted to win. The final battle of the war began not with weapons fire, but with a message that changed everything, Krell thought. He knew about ending conflicts, Admiral. Lee's transmission arrived on a quiet morning when both fleets were preparing for what everyone knew would be the decisive engagement. The human colony ships had reached their destination, but Vorthon reinforcements were arriving within hours. Whoever controlled the space around New Busan would determine the outcome of the entire war. "Commander Krell," Admiral Lee said from the main screen of the Iron Winds bridge, "I am sending you tactical analysis of the coming battle. My staff calculates that you have a 73% chance of victory if both sides fight at full strength." Krell looked at Lieutenant Yoon with confusion. Why would an enemy commander share his own analysis of defeat? It made no strategic sense. "I am also sending you casualty projections," Lee continued. "If we fight this battle, approximately 4,000 humans will die. Your losses will be roughly 6,000 Vorthon personnel. That is 10,000 people who will never go home to their families." The data arrived on Krell's tactical console moments later. His own military computers confirmed Lee's numbers. The battle would be bloody for both sides, with the Vorthon forces likely to win through superior numbers and firepower. "Admiral Lee," Krell replied through the communication channel, "why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand the true cost of what we are about to do. Those numbers represent real people with real lives. Sons and daughters, parents and children, friends and lovers. All of them will die for a piece of empty space around a planet that has room for everyone." Krell stared at the casualty projections on his screen. In 30 years of military service, he had rarely thought about enemy losses in personal terms. Dead opponents were statistics, not people with hopes and dreams and families waiting for them to come home. "What are you proposing?" Krell asked. "A negotiated settlement. Your empire wants to demonstrate its power and secure its borders. We want to protect our people and establish a new colony. Surely there is a way to accomplish both goals without killing 10,000 people." For the next 6 hours, Krell found himself doing something he had never done before. Instead of planning a battle, he was planning a peace. Admiral Lee proved to be as skilled at negotiation as he was at warfare. The human understood both the political needs of the Vorthon Empire and the survival requirements of his own people. The agreement they reached was complex, but fair. The human colony would be allowed to establish itself on New Busan, but it would operate under a joint administration that included Vorthon representatives. Trade between the colony and the empire would follow established galactic commerce laws. Both sides would share scientific research and medical knowledge. Most importantly, the space around New Busan would be declared a neutral zone where military vessels from either side could operate only with permission from both governments. This agreement satisfies neither of our original objectives, Krell pointed out during the final negotiation session. "No," Admiral Lee agreed, "but it allows both of our peoples to survive and prosper. Sometimes that is more important than getting everything you want." The peace treaty was signed aboard the neutral station, where Krell and Colonel An had arranged their prisoner exchange. Representatives from both governments attended the ceremony, but Krell found himself focused on the moment when he would meet Admiral Lee face to face. The human admiral was shorter than Krell had expected, with graying hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of long years making difficult decisions. He wore his dress uniform with dignity but without arrogance. When they shook hands in the human custom, Lee's grip was firm and steady. "Admiral Lee," Krell said, "you have taught me much about warfare. You have taught me as well, Commander. You fight with skill and honor. Your people are fortunate to have soldiers like you protecting them." They stood together for a moment, two warriors who had spent months trying to kill each other and had somehow found mutual respect in the process. "Admiral," Krell said, "may I ask you a personal question?"
"Of course. What will you do now that the war is over?"
Lee smiled. "I plan to request assignment to the new joint academy that our governments are establishing. I think there is much we can learn from each other about military strategy and tactics." "I was going to make the same request," Krell replied. 6 months later, Commander Krell stood in front of a classroom filled with young officers from a dozen different species. The Human Vorthon Military Academy had grown beyond its original purpose and become a center for studying interspecies cooperation and conflict resolution. "Today we will discuss the New Busan campaign," Krell announced to his students. "Can anyone tell me why this conflict is studied throughout the galaxy?" A young Vorthon officer raised her hand. "Sir, because it was the first war to end in a negotiated peace rather than total victory for one side." "Partially correct," Krell replied. "But there is a more important reason. This war demonstrated that military effectiveness is not just about weapons and tactics. It is about understanding why you are fighting and what you are willing to sacrifice to achieve your goals." A human student near the back of the classroom spoke up. Sir, what was the most important lesson you learned during that campaign? Krell thought about the question for a moment. He could have talked about tactical innovations or strategic adaptations. Instead, he chose to share something more personal. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing what is right even when you are afraid. The human forces were outnumbered and outgunned throughout the entire conflict, but they never stopped fighting for what they believed in. Captain Wang Sung-ho, now serving as a co-instructor at the academy, added from his position near the front of the room. Commander Krell taught us something equally important. He showed us that an honorable enemy can become an honored friend. When he agreed to the prisoner exchange and the final peace negotiations, he proved that wisdom and compassion are just as important as strength and determination. After class, Krell and Wang walked together through the academy gardens. The facility had been built on a small moon in neutral space, with gardens representing plants from many different worlds. Human cherry trees grew beside Vorthan crystal flowers, creating a display that would have been impossible before the war. Wang, Krell said as they sat on a bench beneath a tree from Earth. Do you ever regret how the war ended? What do you mean? Your people could have been heroes. You could have fought to the death and been remembered as martyrs who died for freedom. Instead, you chose compromise and survival. Wang looked up at the alien stars visible through the moon's thin atmosphere. Commander, there are many different kinds of heroism. Sometimes the greatest courage is knowing when to fight and when to make peace. The young officers we teach will face conflicts we cannot imagine, Krell observed. What is the most important thing we can give them? The understanding that war should never be the first choice, but when it becomes necessary, it must be fought with honor. We must teach them to be strong enough to defend what matters, wise enough to know what is worth defending, and compassionate enough to find peace when the fighting is done. As the two former enemies sat together in the garden, Krell reflected on how much his life had changed since that first day when he had watched the human fleet approach with such confidence in his own experience and abilities. He had believed nothing could surprise him in combat. Then humanity had changed everything he thought he knew about warfare, honor, sacrifice, and the true meaning of victory. The greatest lesson of all was that the best warriors were not those who won every battle, but those who remembered their humanity even in the midst of war. The humans had taught him that some things were more important than winning. They had taught him that some things were worth fighting for, even when fighting seemed hopeless. Most importantly, they had taught him that enemies could become friends, and that peace was always worth pursuing, even after the longest and most bitter conflicts. Years later, when historians wrote about the New Busan campaign, they would call it the war that changed everything. But for Krell, it would always be remembered as the time when he learned that there was more to being a soldier than simply following orders and winning battles. It was the time when he learned what it truly meant to be human. Even though he belonged to a completely different species, the humans had not just changed his understanding of combat, they had changed his understanding of life itself. 5 years had passed since the end of the New Busan War, and Commander Krell found himself standing in a place he never could have imagined during those early battles. The graduation ceremony of the Human Vorthan Military Academy was taking place in the Great Hall, with students from 17 different species preparing to receive their commissions as officers in the new Galactic Peace Corps. Captain Wang Sung-ho stood beside him on the platform, both of them wearing the distinctive blue uniforms that marked them as instructors in interspecies military cooperation. Behind them sat Admiral Lee, now serving as the Academy's director, and Colonel An So-young, who had become the head of diplomatic studies. Look at them, Wang said quietly, gesturing toward the graduating class. Humans, Vorthons, Zelkari, Nethys, even representatives from the Quantum Collective. 5 years ago, most of these species had never worked together on anything. Krell nodded, watching as young officers from different worlds sat side by side, their various forms of military dress creating a colorful display of galactic unity. In the front row, he could see Lieutenant Kim Sunwoo, a human student who had written her final thesis on Vorthon tactical formations. Next to her sat Cadet Thex, a young Vorthon who had specialized in human psychological warfare techniques. When I first encountered human military forces, Krell said, I thought you were simply unpredictable. I did not understand that you were fighting according to principles I had never learned. The ceremony began with Admiral Lee approaching the podium. The former human fleet commander looked older now, with more gray in his hair, but his eyes still held the same steady determination that Krell remembered from their first meeting. "Today, we graduate the largest class in Academy history," Lee announced to the assembled crowd. "These officers represent the future of galactic military cooperation. They have learned not just how to fight, but when to fight, and more importantly, when not to fight." Krell remembered his own graduation from the Vorthon Military Institute decades ago. The ceremony had focused on victory, conquest, and the glory of the Empire. This graduation was different. These young officers had been taught that military service was about protection, not domination. "The greatest lesson these graduates have learned," Lee continued, "is that strength without wisdom is meaningless and wisdom without compassion is worthless. They go forth not as conquerors, but as guardians of peace." When the formal ceremony ended, Krell found himself approached by several graduates who wanted to thank him for his teaching. Among them was Ensign Park Hee-jin, a young human woman who had excelled in his advanced tactics course. "Professor Krell," she said, using the title he had earned at the academy, "your class has changed how I think about military strategy. You taught us that understanding your enemy is more important than defeating them." "Ensign Park," Krell replied, "you have learned the most important lesson of all. When you understand your enemy, you often discover they are not really your enemy at all." Later that evening, the Academy held a reception for graduates and their families. Krell watched as species that had been at war for centuries shared food and stories. Vorthon parents met human parents, discovering that their concerns for their children's safety and future were exactly the same. "It is remarkable," said a voice behind him. Krell turned to see Dr. Chen Min-jae, a human medical officer who taught courses in battlefield medicine and prisoner care. "When I was serving on hospital ships during the war, I never imagined I would someday be teaching Vorthon students how to treat human patients." "The war changed all of us," Krell agreed, "but perhaps it changed us for the better." Dr. Chen nodded. Toward a group of students near the refreshment table, a human cadet was explaining something to two Vorthon classmates, gesturing enthusiastically while they listened with obvious interest. "Those three have been inseparable since their first year," Chen said. "Cadet Wilson is teaching them about human emotional responses to combat stress. In return, they are teaching him about Vorthon meditation techniques for maintaining focus under pressure." "Knowledge shared freely between former enemies," Krell observed. "Admiral Lee would be pleased." The next morning, Krell received an assignment. That would have been impossible 5 years earlier. The Galactic Council had requested a joint human Vorthon military mission to investigate reports of piracy in the Outer Rim territories. Pirates had been attacking ships from multiple species, and only a combined force would have the authority and capability to stop them. "Commander Krell," Admiral Lee said during the mission briefing, "you will be serving as tactical advisor to Captain Kim Tae-sung of the human cruiser Harmony. Your job is to coordinate strategy between human and Vorthon forces." Captain Kim was a veteran of the New Busan campaign, one of the officers who had served under Admiral Lee during the final battles. When Krell met him aboard the Harmony, he was surprised to find that the human captain had studied Vorthon military history extensively. "Commander," Captain Kim said as they shook hands, "I have read your tactical analyses of the New Busan battles. Your adaptation to human fighting methods was brilliant. I hope to learn from your experience." The mission to the Outer Rim took 3 weeks and proved to be everything the Academy had prepared them for. Human ships provided speed and flexibility, while Vorthon vessels offered heavy firepower and defensive capability. When they finally cornered the pirate fleet, the combined force was able to capture the raiders without firing a single shot. "How did we achieve surrender without combat?" asked Ensign Park, who was serving her first assignment aboard the Harmony. Captain Kim smiled. "We used something Professor Krell taught us in Academy. We showed the pirates that resistance was futile, but we also offered them fair treatment if they surrendered. They saw both our strength and our mercy, and they chose wisely." On the journey back to Academy space, Krell found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that first battle at New Busan. The human approach to warfare had spread throughout the galaxy, not through conquest, but through example. Species that had fought for thousands of years were learning to resolve conflicts through negotiation and cooperation. "Commander," Captain Kim said, joining him in the observation deck, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Do you ever regret how the war ended? Your people could have achieved total victory if the fighting had continued." Krell looked out at the stars, thinking about all the young officers they were returning to the academy, all the lives that had been saved by choosing peace over continued war. "Captain Kim," he said finally, "victory is not about defeating your enemies. Victory is about creating a galaxy where your children can live in peace. The humans taught me that the greatest battles are won, not with weapons, but with wisdom." When they returned to the academy, Krell was asked to address the new class of incoming students. Standing before young faces from across the galaxy, he felt the weight of responsibility that came with teaching the next generation of military leaders. "When I first encountered human forces," he began, "I believed that military experience was the only thing that mattered in warfare. I had fought for 30 years and thought I had seen everything there was to see about combat." A young human student raised her hand. "What changed your mind, sir?" "I learned that experience without understanding is worthless. The humans forced me to question everything I thought I knew about why we fight wars and how we should conduct them. They showed me that the strongest military force is one that fights not for conquest, but for protection of others." After the lecture, Krell walked through the academy gardens with Captain Wang. The trees from Earth had grown taller, and new plants from other worlds had been added to the collection. It was a living symbol of how different species could thrive together. "Wang," Krell said, "when young officers ask me about the secret to military success, I give them the same answer you taught me. We fight not because we have to, but because we choose to. And what choice are we teaching them to make? The choice, to be strong enough to defend what matters, wise enough to know what is worth defending, and compassionate enough to find peace when the fighting is done." As they sat beneath the earth cherry tree that had become their favorite meeting place, Krell thought about the message he would send to his old commanders on Vorthon Prime. The weekly reports he filed now were very different from the military dispatches he had written during the war. "The Academy continues to produce exceptional officers," he would write. "They are learning that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the wisdom to turn enemies into allies." The humans were right. Some things are more important than winning battles. Years passed and the academy grew. Former students established similar institutions throughout the galaxy. The principles that had once seemed uniquely human became universal values: honor in combat, mercy toward the defeated, protection of the innocent, and the pursuit of peace even in the midst of war. When historians looked back on the new Busan War, they called it the conflict that changed the nature of galactic civilization. But for Krell, it would always be remembered as the time when he learned the most important lesson of his life. He had believed nothing could surprise him in combat. Then humanity changed everything he thought he knew about warfare, honor,